morning. And happy Thursday, the 28th of November. This is the Burning Platform on the Podcast Party, and we have a hell of a lineup for you. So I've got my partner in crime, Phumi and Gareth, who's on the line. She is in the studio in Johannesburg, and we are ready to talk some nonsense until at least about 22, because we're going to take your comments and your thoughts in this discussion as well. It's like the most incredible year, and we felt like we needed to do a bit of a year in review as we wind down. And you can feel it already. People are starting to wind down. The Christmas decorations are all up. There is music everywhere. And we thought, you know what? This is as good a time as any to actually just take a deep breath, because it's been one hell of a year. Later on, I will be talking to Congressman Thomas Massie from the United States, who's a Republican, but he's also a Libertarian and is one of the most interesting people in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's in South Africa for a short while, speaking at a conference this weekend, which I'll also be speaking at. And I thought, you know what? Let's get to some of that too. So Thomas Massie, you can look him up. He's a fascinating guy. He's been on the right and wrong side of Trump. He's been very outspoken. He votes a lot of the time in unexpected ways with people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and many others. He believes that America should be involved in no international wars. He believes that no taxpayers' money from the United States should be spent on any other country's foreign aid. He believes that America is America first, basically, and everything else comes after that. But we'll hear from him in a little while. First of all, how are you, Pums?
Jeez, it's the last Thursday of November. Guys, we have 2 weeks until, as South Africa says, Gidi Zembabas.
Yeah, Chile time. 2
weeks. We just have to hold on for 2 more weeks, and then and then it's that time of the year. Somebody said to me that December is a feeling, not a time. And
Yeah,
I think this is definitely the year that December feeling needs to like kick in ASAP, because a lot has happened this year, not just in South Africa, all over the world. And if we think about what happened in January, there's one big thing that we all know happened in January, but then after that, it's all a blur. You're just like, that was in March, that was in February, that was in April. So yeah, this is how I'm feeling. I'm glad we're here. We're finally at this stage of the year, and I cannot wait.
Well, I
for
mean,
long days.
I got to tell you, I see Congo Chris is already all over the politics this morning with Kamala's drunk press statement. There's a very funny video that was going around on Instagram and X where she's like swilling around a bottle of something. Listen, if I were Kamala, I'd also be drunk. I mean, like, what else does she have to do now? Her campaign spent so much money that they're $200 million in debt. I don't know if that's happened before. And it's so funny, like the Trump campaign, which ended with a surplus. He's like, do you need me to lend you some money? Anyway.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the press statement.
No, neither have I. I'm not really all that interested in it.
I have stopped. I have stopped kind of looking at all of that stuff. I've stopped looking at all of I'm trying, but I'm a junkie. I'm a news junkie. So I haven't completely cut myself off. So
it's sort of enough. I feel like we've had, it feels like 4 years of campaigning for this 4 years of being president. And I've just had enough. I do think that the most interesting new development is something which was yesterday. Trump is rounding off his appointments for cabinet. And I see he's made Jay Bhattacharya, who was, of course, one of the doctors who was blacklisted by social media. You remember? Because Jay Bhattacharya is one of those people who put out the, what was it called? There was that statement that all the doctors put out together. Remember?
Yeah.
Anyway, he's going to be the new director of the National Institute of Health. And obviously, he has an intention to make scientific institutions in America worthy of trust again. That's what he's saying. It was the something declaration
So one of the things that I am
during
trying
COVID.
to, one of the things that I am trying to minimize on in my slippery slope down to December. Actually, I'm gonna wait till the 20th of January. I'm gonna wait till all of that to start getting back into who's doing what Trump is saying, because I think what we've seen in the past 3 weeks is we've seen some unexpected calls from him. We've seen a lot, and I keep feeling like, Haibo, just give Joe Biden the chance to like go off into the sunset. Just wait, you know? And Trump's not waiting. I saw the statement from Mexico after Trump was tweeting about his tariffs, and I'm like, guys, just calm down, people. Today's Thanksgiving, so I hope the Americans are just going to post their Thanksgiving plates and they're not going to post anything more than that. And do you remember? Like in September there was all that woo-ha online about the pygmy hippopotamus in Taiwan? Did you see that, or did you miss
No,
that?
I honestly don't know anything about that. This is something I completely missed. Go on.
What? So I am watching Mudeng. Mudeng is the name of the pygmy hippopotamus that was born in a Taiwanese zoo. And then suddenly, because the zookeeper kept posting stuff on his TikTok with this really cute, chubby, skinny hippopotamus, that zoo literally went from having 800 visitors a day to like 20,000 visitors over the weekends. That's how
Yeah.
this hippopotamus, and now they have a live feed. Okay, so they have a live feed that you can just log onto the live feed and watch what's happening in the hippopotamus pen in this. So I'm doing that. I'd rather see the cute
Well,
hippopotamus with its
listen,
hydrated skin.
I don't blame you. And let's not forget this was also the year of the Olympics and probably the best Olympics of all time, if you ask me. I mean, certainly the number of
In a
records.
long time. In a
Yeah, I
long
mean, and Paris did a great job of putting it on, even though there was controversy around that too. Just by the way, to fill in those gaps that I left for myself just a moment ago, Jay Bhattacharya was one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was, of course, that group of then rogue, in inverted commas, doctors who said that the rest of them had it wrong about COVID and about the vaccines and everything else. So interesting stuff happening. I mean, we've almost done a 180-degree turn from where we were 4 years ago, which is, I do think, if I consider how we were all feeling in 2020 at this point, I don't think that the world was in a very good place. And I think we will look back on that time and we will be, and I don't just mean politically or in terms of the COVID situation or anything else. I think we all felt totally disconnected from each other. We had been physically and all the rest of it. And here we are 4 years later, and things just feel a very, very different way. And I think that's good. So, yes, we've had a crazy year. I just want to go through a couple of things, Pums, that happened this year that you may or may not remember. Japan had an earthquake, which we'd completely forgotten about.
Yeah, but that's because Japan has earthquakes.
120 people died in that. We had space exploration like almost never before, and some of that was NASA with Vulcan. Some of it was Elon Musk's SpaceX and incredible vehicles that are now able to come back to Earth and be reused, and can come back to Earth and be caught in a pair of forceps that are the size of
Like
skyscrapers. It's just
like a hug.
unbelievable. That to me, when we talk about the achievements of humanity, we can't really consider it much of an achievement if we're doing what people 100 years ago could do. We haven't then improved on that very much. This is something people 100 years ago could not do. So it truly feels like a very, big achievement for humanity, as opposed to just some other thing that we've been doing. Let me think here. South Africa's general election, of course. We mustn't forget that we had a massive and I think groundbreaking elections. The first election that the majority party did not win outright. And, we move so quickly on from, we don't consider, and we all do this individually too, when you're having successes or when you're having different achievements to what you've had before, you tend to just start again at zero. And zero is so much more steps ahead than you actually are counting. And I think that
also, when you have such high highs and such low lows, right? It feels you're like in a tailspin as well. Over and above the fact that most of us are just trying to like survive. We're just trying to like raise our kids. We're trying to have, we just want to raise our kids, want to watch our favorite TV show, without getting interrupted by load shedding, which was a thing we still had earlier this year. We forgot about this as well.
absolutely. And since March, 240 days of uninterrupted power. Big ups. I've given him kudos before on the show, but I think Teto Nyati, who took over there at Eskom, and we always nail Eskom CEO and Dan Morgane. But let's just give credit where it's due, because when we are angry with people, we mention their names, we say how shit they are. We say that they've now joined the MK party. Brian Molefe, who said that name, not me. There are lots of people. There are lots of people who are worthy of criticism, but I do think it's also nice occasionally to give some credit where it's due. And we do have people who are taking their jobs a little more seriously now. I would be very, very nervous to give the politicians too much credit, but the people who actually do the work seem to be getting on with it and making a change in positive ways in certain places.
Absolutely. But this has definitely been, and somebody, Dirk, is saying that half the world voted this year. So that's why we feel like we've been in like campaign after campaign after campaign. I mean, obviously there are countries that didn't get the same kind of attention with their votes. We have two big wars that everybody is concentrating on, but we're actually sitting with, I think a couple of days ago, we were talking about this in our office, 124 armed conflicts around the world currently.
Yeah, but they're counting. They're counting like the zamazamas in the mines as well.
No one's counting the zamazamas. No one's counting. But then zamazama, right? Then there are zamazamas. Jack and I this morning were talking about Pastor Mporo and his machete. Do you understand the year we have had, guys?
Somebody said, have you seen Julius lately? He's very, very thin.
I wanted to say, he's having a public meltdown.
Well, Herman Mashaba had a public meltdown. Julius is having a public meltdown.
It hasn't stopped. Herman's public meltdown has not stopped.
No, but isn't this great? Because if they're melting down, the chances are we're all very happy. This has been easily Julius Malema's worst year in politics. It's been Herman Mashaba's worst year in politics. It's been everybody's worst year except Cyril Ramaphosa's worst year. He's had a great year because he got the GNU together to cover his ass. He continues to do what he's always done. Terrible laws are still being made. The DA has become his lapdog. There's a lot that we can be pissed off about, but I think there's also quite a lot that we can be quietly and cautiously.
Yeah, guys, somebody's reminding us here about Bitcoin Boot, about the military camp. Do you remember the military camp that was with the Libyans outside Pretoria? Hey!
Well, in Mpumalanga, let's not blame. Don't blame Pretoria. I won't have my city dragged through the mud even more than it already is.
But, okay, no, but let's have I do want to talk about Julius and his meltdown a little bit, because it's also what did they call it? The Progressive Caucus is what they were saying that they're gonna like come together. The MK, which is 11 months old, an 11-month-old party, has shaken the way our politics is working. Yeah, it's got old people in it, like Jacob Zuma and all of the people who have left the EFF. And I mean, the MK for me is more than a coalition of the disgruntled. It's also like the band of thieves. All of the people who are trying to rewrite history for us, right? Revising what we do know. You spoke about Molefe just now. You know, we talk about the Brian Molefe, we talk about the impeached judge. We're talking about former Prasa CEO. You know, all of the people that were part of very, very big and famous names coming through in that 3 years of watching Judge Zondo, suddenly kind of all coalescing around Jacob Zuma and what they're building over there. But lots of talk about maybe Julius and Jacob, after that wonderful tea they had in Nkandla, will come together and do something, and it's falling apart.
Carl dos Santos has no sympathy. He says, I feel nothing for Julius. Classic fuck around and find out. And then I see a question here from Azalea for you, Pums. Azalea says,
Yeah.
Pumi, did you see that Panyaza Lesufi was on Mac G's podcast? Was thinking of you while watching it.
Panyaza Lesufi, guys. Remember these words. Panyaza Lesufi is bad news for us. Oh, that guy. There's a person I have not an iota of anything but contempt for. Oh, he irritates me so much. I haven't seen him on the MacG. Is he having a public meltdown too? Because MacG has that effect on people. And now I have to go and look.
Yeah,
MacG has that effect on people. I don't know how he makes everybody lose themselves.
I think I better watch that as well. Also, I've got to say, like, my favorite country to watch this year has been Argentina for very obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They've got a guy called Javier Milei. And speaking of podcasts, I took the trouble to listen to quite a long and, for the first time, detailed interview that Lex Friedman did with Milei.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which they did very cleverly because obviously he speaks Spanish, Lex speaks English, and he used AI to do a direct translation of what Milei was saying in Spanish. And it was a very interesting interview to listen to because you hear what the guy, who's an economics professor, I mean, that's what he did before, and a rock star, which is also what he did before, how he's almost single-handedly, he's got a good team of people with him in Argentina at the moment, but they've managed to turn a huge deficit into a surplus. They've managed to turn around a really bad inflation. The average Argentine now is on their way to being one of the better off citizens in the world. I'm talking about average ones. There are obviously some people who are still struggling at the bottom of that pyramid. There are a couple of people who are at the top of it. But I think watch Argentina because Argentina once used to be the world's best economy. You know that?
Yeah. Well, South America was on the up and up for a while. And then things changed, and then everything changed.
And he's done what every other government person in probably living memory for me has been unable to do. A fuerte, you know, where he gets rid of all the departments. He's just cutting departments out of government. He's fired thousands of useless workers in the Argentine government and set an example for other countries, which we're likely to see happen in America now, if you pay attention to what Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon are supposed to do for Trump in DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. I wonder if it's ever, even in my wildest fever dreams, a likelihood that we could go into our government and cut unnecessary expenditure and jobs. I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean, wow, would be amazing. We need it. We need it. We need someone with a chainsaw to attack all of our government departments. I mean, I'm amazed.
Oh, man.
I saw this thing the other day that there is a department in one of our neighboring African countries, a department for, what did they say it was? Young people and women and people with disabilities and people with mental health issues and all of this stuff. But they put all these people together in one department. And I thought, there's a stupid thing that we could get rid of. But anyway, there's so much else that we have to talk about here, Pums. Let me just go through a few things that also happened in the year that you may have forgotten about already. We had a couple of accidents, bus accidents, and situations. Right? Remember, those were ugly. Nosiviwe Mapisangakula. Remember what's happened to her? She's still
in the dock.
In the dock. She hasn't had a great year, and she
You
used
know
to be
who else was in the dock this week? This week, and we didn't even see it happen. Do you remember Miss Quinana? She of the Amakwenya and SAA example, right? She was in the dock this week for fraud and irregularly appointing an auditing company. So Miss Quinana was in the dock this week at the Commercial Crimes Court. Like, what? We didn't even see that. Nosiviwe, who did say that she is in the dock to try and I think ride the wave that she thought Julius was going to bring with their case at the Constitutional Court this week, that the reason she is being targeted is because she wanted to look into the Phala Phala matter.
Yeah. Well, that's also an ongoing thing. I see the EFF trying to stitch together a tiny bit of public support around Phala Phala. But Congo Chris says also Danny Jordan was thrown in the docks this year, which is an unexpected pleasure. Dudu Mieni died, which is also talking about pleasure. That's something else that happened.
Man, Gareth.
Well, I'm still pleased you see me. I get excited in the morning when I think about all the communists. Pravin Gordhan died this year, another good one to go. Listen, these are the things that make me wake up with a smile. What can I tell you?
Although one thing, somebody else who did die this year, and I think I, for one, am going to miss those horrible pictures he used to put of his chicken drowning in garlicky water.
Tito, yeah.
Tito Mboweni. Also this year.
Yeah, I'm sad about him. The rest, all the others that I mentioned just now, gives me great happiness that the world is rid of them. What else do we have? We had a lot of stories around human trafficking this year, which is scary. 90 Ethiopian immigrants were rescued in a police raid in Johannesburg back in August, remember?
No, I don't remember that at all.
It happened. We got a first Miss Deaf South Africa back in August also.
Yes.
We also went to the ICC to stop Israel from doing what happened. ICJ, which, we wanted to stop Israel
from the ICC.
They're all the same. They're all UN outgrowths.
And the ICC did put out...
They're all metastasized chances of the United Nations, which is an absolute disgrace and ought to be disbanded. And I can say that now because shame, poor old JJ Cornish is no more. And the only reason I was holding any space for the UN is because he held them in high esteem. We had our Bella bill signed back in September, and whether that's going to happen or not, we'll see. But of course, the DA put up zero resistance, despite saying that was one of their red lines, before the election. So we can see that they have spines made of cheese. We had these poisonings in the spaza shops.
Your spate of, in the past month, we've just had week after week, almost daily, stories of young children eating poisoned things that they bought at spaza shops, and having even fatalities, which of course has showed up that we do not have another broken thing in our government is we have no health inspectors going to all of these places that do handle food for the public, which we should have thought about, and that should have shown up and been a big, big, big red flag when the Inyobeni deaths happened, because that's one of the things, and that's still in court at the moment. And one of the things that I think about 3 weeks ago, in the court, they actually admitted, the Department of Health actually admitted that they don't have enough health inspectors and that they rely on the police to do these inspections, which is not.
Couple
We
other
are
things.
not doing enough at our government, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, we don't hate the government enough. It's been a terrible year, speaking of hating, for the media, and they deserve everything that's come at them. I mean, we've seen News 24 say that they might not be in business for very much longer. IOL continues its dance of death with Iqbal Serve. The Daily Maverick is begging like a homeless person on the street corner for extra money wherever it can get it. Good.
MultiChoice. What was the 10 babies story? Was that last year?
and MultiChoice have lost 800,000 subscribers in the last year. So it's all falling apart in the mainstream media. Shame. I'm so sorry. It couldn't happen to nicer people. I also saw here a comment from Dirk. He said, another year and still no one mentioned in the Zondo report behind bars. Yonda brought up Cat Williams unleashing all the truths and all the cults. P. Diddy, that whole situation, which is on
1,000 bottles of baby oil.
Carol reminds me of the NHI bill that was signed in May. And Congo Chris says quite rightly, we found out that Naledi Pandor has Hamas on speed dial. Well, I don't know who she's calling now because they've blown up every one of the leaders of Hamas. There isn't anyone, and no one wants to take charge. You know what I thought about the other day? I thought about that brilliant move, which is, I guarantee you, in 100, 200, 300 years' time, people will be learning about Israel and the pages and the walkie-talkies and the fact that that was probably one of the most brilliant intelligence operations in all of military history. And it's got the Ayatollah sitting in his house, nervous as hell, not willing to use
his house. He's not in his house.
He's nervous to use his toaster. He's nervous to use a bedside lamp. He can't. I guarantee he doesn't have a phone anywhere near him. The Ayatollah is shitting bricks every day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Dirk wants to know if any positive things happened this year.
Yes,
Dirk,
lots.
We've got no load shedding, guy. We've got no load shedding. That is a positive thing. Here we sit with lights all day. We have got, didn't I speak about the hippo? That was cute. That was good.
And there was baboon. There was a very clever baboon that was known for stealing lollipops who managed to escape from a relocation trap, showcasing his intelligence and adaptability. So well done to that baboon.
But also, I do think that even as we talk about the shifts that have happened this year with all the political upheaval, guys, we don't talk enough about the fact that we have had a transition. We've had a changeover, as it were, in with government ministers, with a more equitable showing in terms of who's showing up in the ballot and how they are showing up and what that has translated into for our government, right? So for a ruling party, for a governing party like the ANC, who for the past 30 years have basically run unchecked, to find themselves in the position where they had to go back and negotiate with everybody around the table to say, how do we move to the next level? How do we keep our president, as much as you know how I feel about the president that we have? How do we keep our president? How do you work with us to make sure that we can move these particular things forward, whether we like them or not? What it does show is it does show a level of maturing in our government systems. And it does mean that change is a possible and a nothing burger, really, which is what it should be. It should be a
Oh,
nothing burger. We should be able to change and shift things and change our minds about who is in what position without it being a source of anxiety. And as we see happening right next door in Mozambique, violence in the streets.
yeah, correct. And I think it's also worth mentioning, Azalea says, special mention, honorable mention to Reagan at the Olympics, the Australian break dancer. That was entertaining as hell, right? And Pumi's right. Like, if we're not talking about government, which I found we're doing less and less of at the moment, I think that's a hugely positive sign. It's a very healthy thing for us to not be bombarded by stories from government. That's usually a terrible, terrible sign. We should just be getting on with it. And a lot of people in the comments are saying our bar is low, like Jade Naidu says, our bar is so low that we're happy we don't have load shedding. Yeah, but I think it's worth remarking on. That was our reality for many years. No.
Jack is at the door saying snow in KZN in October.
Correct. Yeah, and KZN,
if that's a good thing, Jack.
And had floods this year as well. There were hurricanes effectively that ripped into the coastline of KZN. So definitely some tough stuff going on there too. Government should be seen and not heard. That's what Congo Chris says in the comments. Again, spot on.
Trump assassination attempt, and he survived.
Oh my, exactly. In any other universe, that would have been the biggest story of the year. That was like Zapruder film Kennedy assassination level stuff while everyone was watching their TVs live. And by millimeters, by an absolute ball hair, Donald Trump survives. If he doesn't in that scenario, the world just turns into a totally different place.
Oh my God. A ball
No, it does.
Really?
By a ball hair. Pums, if that had happened, and what's so weird is nobody even knows the name or remembers any of the details of the guy who tried to kill Trump. We don't know anything about him. His house was scrubbed. He had no social media. I mean, he must have been the only person in the world of his age that didn't have a bigger social media footprint than an actual life experience footprint. Unreal.
So and I think the best news of all of this shift, this upheaval, this changes, is that in 2025 we go into it with more stability. We go into 2025 with less uncertainty. We go into 2025 with a little bit more of a grip, of a handle on what is where and what it means. Even if unexpected things happen, it's not going to be the norm. It's not going to be like a freaking roller coaster.
Provided Joe Biden doesn't go and give intercontinental ballistic missiles to Ukraine and they start to agitate old Vlad right on his border and we launch into World War III, which we absolutely don't need to do. So on his way out, can someone just take the controls away from the senile old age home patient, please? So that would be nice because then we can actually go into 2025 with a little less anxiety.
Listen, I think we are all going into 2025 with less anxiety.
And by the way, one other thing that I'm really, really satisfied about, and what we were taught this year, principally by the American elections, but in other ways too, is that influencers are finished. Celebrities are finished. We don't need to be paying any more attention to people who say that they've got millions and millions of followers and therefore are important, and people who are being paid to put on shows, to make speeches. These are no longer the people who influence the world. They are not as powerful as we had once believed. So when someone says, but Taylor Swift, or but Beyonce, or but Jennifer Lopez, I just go, nah, not going to happen.
one thing that we didn't talk about in popular culture is we didn't talk about, because, and this is the kind of year that we've had, right? The big stuff, the big movies, the big songs. We didn't even talk about the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef, which is ongoing as Drake sues his record label that he lost the beef. I was just like,
It's unreal.
boom.
Unreal.
Boom. So there have been a lot of things, and really interesting times, which is a Chinese curse, and we've survived it.
Yeah, and we've had we've got Thomas Massie coming up in a moment or two, but we've had some great guests on the Burning Platform, on the podcast party this year. We've had international visitors of massive influence and repute. We had Eric Weinstein here. We had Douglas Murray here. We've spoken to so many interesting people, and there's a range of incredible interviews that you can find, which will be like a time capsule for 2024 going forward. And I'm very, very pleased that we got to be part of those conversations and to bring them to you. So that, I think, is extremely cool. And Judas brings up, let us not forget the most heated discussion on the Burning Platform, Phumi versus that lady from the Sarah party that moved to MK, whose name you can't even remember, Judas. I don't blame you.
Oh, Judas. It was a big year, guys. It was a big year. And we survived it all to tell the tale. This is the best.
Dirk is saying you were the star of the show this year. Pumi's had some good scraps with guests. Also need Canthan a few more times a year, says Dirk, giving credit to our two starring champions, Phumi Mashiko and Canthan Pele.
I think the biggest champion is the fact that we remain undefeated as one of the biggest contributors to the political discourse, to the heavy conversations, to the difficult conversations, to all of these incredible people who don't get the opportunity to have open, candid, uncensored conversations. We remain the biggest contributor to that body of work on the continent, on the internet. So whoop, whoop.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast party is about a year old. I think we started it in November last year. And the principal objective of the podcast party was to bring you people who think differently and to bring you conversations that you won't get anywhere else, and to dig deep and to not be afraid to go down some rabbit holes and to not be afraid to dig up controversial stuff. And we spoke to almost every politician that matters. The only ones that we struggled to get hold of were Jacob Zuma, Cyril Ramaphosa. Most of the ANC avoided us at all costs. We did speak to Dada Morero, who's now quite important in Gauteng. But you know what? I think that we've only just begun, and there's going to be a whole lot more on the way in that front too. I think, Phumi, I'm not just speaking for me here, but I think we're all just kind of hut full of politicians now. Yeah. Let's have Christmas without them. Let's have New Year without them, and then we can move on from there.
Guys, also undefeated is the comment section. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for spending your time with us every Thursday morning. And for all of the people who've liked and subscribed, share the podcast, share with everybody, tell everybody. Next year, let's make it bigger and better.
Couldn't agree more. All right, let's get into a discussion that I had with a U.S. congressman who's in South Africa at the moment. Tried to cover as much as we could. There are a couple of buffering issues. His internet on his side wasn't so great because he's staying with some people in Johannesburg, and I don't know, they must have been overloaded at that point. But you will get the gist of this, and I think you'll enjoy it. He's a very, very individual and singular kind of congressman. One of the few proper libertarians inside the Republican Party. He does not go the way the party wants him to all the time. So he finds himself sometimes on the side of people who the rest of the Republicans regard as the enemy. But Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky, not Kansas. Kentucky is also a real fighter. He's had arguments with Donald Trump. They've kind of patched up their differences in the last 4 years. He's now excited about the new administration, but has his reservations. And you'll notice that during the course of the interview, he wears a pin, which he wears all over. Everywhere he goes in America, he wears a pin, which is a number. It's a number that gets updated all the time. It's the national debt clock of the United States. He wears this wherever he goes, and he makes everybody else in the US very, very uncomfortable because he's reminding them constantly of the fact that they owe more money than they have. And he is almost a lone voice when it comes to bringing down the deficit, talking about how America should pay back everything that it owes. They should live within their means. They should cut government down. So I think he's probably also on his way to having a really good year. And just want to say a big thank you, reiterate what Phumi said to everybody who's been a part of this show for the year. We aren't finished. We'll still do a burning platform or two before the end of the year. So don't worry. But I thought we'd do a little year in review. Let's get to Thomas Massie, congressman from the United States in South Africa this weekend, speaking at a Lib seminar, a seminar on liberty, which is happening in Midrand. I'll post the details of all of that in the description. You can find out more by going to that a little later on. Election year in the United States, an election year in South Africa, and a year in which so much is happening on the political front. I could be joined this fine day by a U.S. representative, no less than the member of the Republican Party and the American politician who is the United States representative for Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. He is Congressman Thomas Massie. Thank you, sir, for giving us some of your time, and welcome to South Africa.
Yeah, this is my first time to South Africa. Very exciting. I've been here less than 24 hours.
Well, I'm very happy that you could make some of this time for us because there's so much to talk about. I mean, I don't think it's an understatement to say that this is probably one of the most exciting years to be in politics or to be interested in politics, and in particular in a position like yours. You're in the party which is kind of made a clean sweep here. Got the White House, got the House of Representatives, got the Senate, got the popular vote. Kentucky's looking good, right?
Well, it's looking good, but it's an opportunity and we can't waste it. We had a similar situation in the United States when in Trump's first term, in the first half of his first term. We had the Senate, we had the Congress, and we had the White House. And I really think we squandered that. We were supposed to reform healthcare. We didn't pull that off. There were supposed to be innovations in infrastructure. Those did not happen. And anyways, I'm excited, but I want to qualify that by saying we can't screw this up.
Right. Okay. So what can you do? I mean, you know, you're one of a number of representatives in the House, and obviously there are lots of people jockeying for kind of positions in the cabinet right now. I don't know whether Donald Trump once called you a third-rate blowhard or something, and you replied to him and said, "Oh no, that's not fair. I'm at least second-rate," something like that. He hasn't approached you for a cabinet post.
Well, actually, we've patched things up since then. That was when I demanded a vote on the $2 trillion CARES Act. And Congress was going to pass that with nobody present. They were just going to do it by unanimous consent. And I got in my car and I drove 9 hours. And I got to Congress before they could pass $2 trillion. And I objected. And they had to bring everybody in during the height of COVID, the COVID scare. And that's when the president called me a third-rate grandstander, which,
that's it.
You know, that's American for blowhard, I suppose. And my wife reminded me at the time, you don't want to be a first-rate grandstander. So that's why I said I was at least second-rate. But I went on to win my reelection. And then the next election, actually, President Trump endorsed me. And we've had several phone calls. In fact, a couple of phone calls in the last month. A couple of weeks before he got elected, we spoke on the phone. And then a week after he was elected, we spoke on the phone. And we actually talked about Bobby Kennedy, that's RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy's possible appointment to head Health and Human Services in the United States. And that's a very exciting development for us. But yeah, it would be fair to say that Trump and I have gone back and forth. I was one of the people who endorsed Ron DeSantis in the primary. That's the governor of Florida in the United States, right. Very popular governor. Ron did not prevail. I've said we need to figure out, Ron, some way to get you indicted. Every time President Trump gets indicted, his poll numbers go up. And ultimately, that worked to his advantage in the United States because people rallied to his defense. And, 10 days before the election, I was talking to President Trump. And I thought, this is a guy who's 10 days away from prison or president. And it was remarkable, and I was very glad with the outcome. Now, as far as my role in this, in the House of Representatives, we have a very narrow majority. It's not like South Africa where you have, I don't know, 6, 7, 20 parties. How many parties do you have here? Have you lost count?
Don't worry, it's too many to
How many
pay
political
attention.
parties are there?
I give or take somewhere around 15.
Well, listen, 15. Well, in the United States, we pretend there are only 2 parties. But the reality is within each of those 2 parties, there are at least 3 different parties, okay? And that makes it very interesting when you have, 2 parties in the House of Representatives like we do. Yet within the Republican Party, which is the majority party, you have something called the Freedom Caucus, which is a group of 30 or 40 individuals who are to the right of most Republicans. And then you have something called the Tuesday Group. That's merely because they meet on Tuesday. They didn't have a very imaginative naming committee, but they're called the Tuesday Group because they meet on Tuesday, and they're very moderate. Sometimes they could be to the left of some Democrats, even though that's gotten harder to do because within our Democrat Party, you have actual communists and socialists within our Democrat Party. But getting back to the Republican Party, what it means when you have a majority of 2 or 3 or 4 members, yet any one faction comprises a dozen members or more, it means that at any point, one faction can stop forward progress in the House of Representatives, which drives our Speaker, Mike Johnson. And by the way, his reelection is not a foregone conclusion. The media is acting like it is, but it would only take 3 or 4 Republicans to derail his election to Speaker on January 3rd. But it means that even if he is elected to Speaker, he's going to have a rough ride going forward in the next 2 years because any faction can stop things on any given day unless he unites with the Democrat Party. And he's shown a willingness to do that in the past, which has made him unpopular, as you might expect, with conservatives.
Now you mentioned these distinctions within the Republican Party, and I've been looking at the positions you've taken on so many issues. I'm glad that you brought up Bobby Kennedy, because one of the things that you've been very vocal about is food and the quality of food for children, the quality of food in stores, the kinds of things that have been kind of forced down Americans' throats, if you'll pardon the pun, by the food business. And you're a libertarian, so you have an interesting take on foreign relations, on gun rights, and sometimes you find yourself voting with Bernie Sanders on various issues, as opposed to voting with, Ron DeSantis or others. He's not in Congress, obviously, but Republicans in your own caucus.
Yeah. So, and Ron DeSantis did used to be in Congress, and he and I were best friends at the time. But, when they try to hurt me back home in my re-elections among Republicans, they'll say that Thomas Massie always votes with AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. And, and on issues of war and promoting war overseas, I do vote on occasion with them. And so one time we had this issue in front of us, mandatory kill switches in automobiles, very dystopian concept, that the car will evaluate your driving, and it's mandated in U.S. law that within a few years, every new car sold has to be able to convict you and disable the ignition on your car if it thinks you're not driving properly. So I offered legislation to countermand this, to defund this mandate that the Democrats put in place. And I went to AOC and I told her, I said, AOC, back home, they're running ads that say, I always vote with you. Just once, could you vote with me on this issue? And she actually did, in fact, vote with me to defund the automobile kill switch. So you do have to keep in mind that you can find friends on the other side of the aisle. Now, there are 2 terms in the United States that are often thought as synonyms, but once I got elected to Congress, I discovered that they're opposite. And maybe these terms will translate to South African politics or not. Sometimes they call you a partisan. okay, which means that you really just vote with your party all the time. Oh, and it's a pejorative. Oh, he's just a partisan, right? He doesn't think for himself. He's a partisan. And then sometimes they'll call you an ideologue. Oh, he's an ideologue. He is not pragmatic. Don't worry about him. He's such an ideologue. Now, I think ideologue is a term of endearment. It means you have ideas and that you vote according to principle. But in the United States, some people, they mix these two terms up. They use them interchangeably. Oh, he's a partisan. Oh, he's an ideologue. Well, it turns out that partisans are not ideologues. Partisans vote with the party. And a lot of times the party will abandon its principles. So when I'm in Congress and I'm looking for allies on things like defunding automatic kill switches in automobiles or defunding wars overseas, I'll look for the ideologues on the other side of the aisle, because I know they're not going to reflexively vote with Hakeem Jeffries or Nancy Pelosi. They're going to make up their own mind based on ideas. And so that's one of the things that I've discovered in America. I don't know if it translates to South African politics.
A little. I'm afraid that you would find yourself very lonely here, and maybe you do sometimes in Congress, but libertarians are few and far between. And I have a feeling that we should talk about that for a little bit, because many people misunderstand what a libertarian is. And the Libertarian Party, whatever that is in the United States, has had really not terribly much success over the time that it's been in existence. There are obviously people who are not members of the Libertarian Party who are still libertarians. And obviously, when you have people who have the kinds of ideas that libertarians have, they tend to not need to be in groups. First and foremost, they kind of think individually. And I'd be interested to know where it is that where do you have most of the conflict with people in your own party? On what issues do you find that you can't come to terms?
Well, not only do libertarians not need to be in groups, they don't in fact work very well in groups because the group can't get a consensus. But I call myself a libertarian, but a small L libertarian, not a big L libertarian. The Libertarian Party in the United States fails the one simple test, which is, can an association with that party help you get elected? And the answer is resounding no in the United States for the big L Libertarian Party. So I'm a small L libertarian within the Republican Party. And it turns out the Republican Party is better at getting libertarians elected than the Libertarian Party is at getting libertarians elected. But again, that's a source of conflict. I would probably be the most libertarian member of Congress, either in the House or the Senate. But I do find allies who are near me on a lot of issues, like fiscal conservatives would oftentimes be libertarian, maybe not on social issues and maybe not on war, although I would argue there's nothing fiscally conservative about sending $100 billion to Ukraine and funding their war. So sometimes you can find conservatives who are you could almost mistake them for libertarians on a given issue. But those would be the areas that I run afoul of the Republican Party, is they always want to increase military spending. Most of them are neocons, most of the Republicans, which means they're for the next war already, and they don't know what that war is, but they're for it. And a lot of them vote reflexively to increase the military budget. That would be a source of conflict for me. Also, I think you would find, if we get back to ag, we were talking, some Republicans like a big agriculture department. They like the government to control things. And because they're from rural districts, they'll be for subsidizing agriculture, which I would not be. I would be for getting the government out of the way. And so those are some areas of conflict I have.
It's interesting also that into this strange coalition of people who've become President Trump's inner circle, you've got people like Ron Paul, who really is kind of allied to you, at least in terms of foreign interventions. You've been called anti-Israel, you've been called anti-Ukraine. I think it's probably fair for me to give you a chance to explain what your position is when it comes to foreign relations, when it comes to wars, when it comes specifically to Israel and Ukraine, because this is something that people use to cudgel you and to say that you shouldn't be voting for this guy, or you shouldn't support him.
Well, listen, I think I'm one of the best congressmen in relation to sanction another sovereign country and sanction half of the countries in the world. And I'm like, well, that's not very diplomatic of you to sanction these countries or to say that they can't do trade with us. I'm just not for sending our taxpayer dollars overseas. I'm not for bombing other countries using our bombs. No, would I be for selling weapons to an unfriendly country? No, I wouldn't be for that.
One of the things that your erstwhile enemies in politics in America level at you is that you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Ukraine, that you would prefer to be some sort of isolationist almost. You probably find that you're interesting bedfellows occasionally with Ron Paul, who's now also in the Trump inner circle. There are probably a few other people in that cabinet who are going to be on your side of this argument now. What do you say to these people who say, oh, well, he's anti-Israel, so everything else he says must be worthless?
Hey, Gareth, you're being far too kind. They call me Putin's best friend. They call me an anti-Semite. You're being way too kind on me here, but let's use the real terms that they use. They'll say that I'm Al-Qaeda's best friend because I don't want war on terrorism, all over the place, or that I like the North Korea, or that I'm for the Iranian dictator at any given time. So the reality is, I'm just not for sending our money overseas. I'm not for starting another war. And I just don't listen to all the criticism. And the good news is, back home in Kentucky, my constituents aren't buying all of those pejorative terms that have been, and they appreciate that I'm not voting to send our sons and daughters overseas to fight perpetual wars with no mission statements.
It's an interesting thing that wanting to keep the money that is harvested by tax collection in your country is somehow a very controversial position. How is it that America just became okay with sending foreign aid to every other country, whether they're friends or foes, getting involved in wars that just don't seem to end, and that people accept that this is okay, that they're going to be taxed and that this is going to happen to their hard-earned tax money?
Yeah. And, I've made the fiscal argument, and it's resonating with conservatives. Particularly, we've spent twice as much on Ukraine from the United States as we do on our own roads and bridges in the United States in any given year. I'm actually on the transportation committee, so I know that number. And I got fact checked on it, and it turns out to be true. But you know what? We should do more than make the fiscal argument. There's a moral argument to be made as well, and just a practical argument. When you pick a side in a war, half of the people are going to hate you, the half on the side that you've not picked. And we're creating enemies abroad when we do this unnecessarily. Why do we need to be enemies with Russia? We used to rely on them to get our astronauts to the space station, right? Why do we need to be enemies with the Lebanese people? Why do we need to be enemies with Palestinians? We don't need to be their enemies. In fact, we have a lot of people from those countries in our country, in the United States. We're a melting pot. So there's the practical argument of why do we want to create enemies around the world? And then there's also the moral argument. Would the war in Ukraine be over if we hadn't been funding it? Yes, it would probably be over by now, with the same result that we're going to end up with when the whole thing is over, which is that Russia will control part of the eastern portion of Ukraine. That is a foregone conclusion. And It results from us, by the way, our State Department overthrowing their government in 2014.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing.
So let's just quit messing with these other countries.
We watch this from here, and we can't sometimes fathom why certain things seem to be happening and who's behind it. I mean, it all feels very conspiratorial. And speaking of conspiratorial, there's a lot of talk at the moment about how much of what happened in this election is almost a bit of a hangover of 2020 and the COVID scare and everything that happened in the wake of that. And I was wondering, because you once said you unfairly or fairly compared Anthony Fauci to a lot of not so nice things, and I kind of agree with you on all of those. What do you think we can do to make sure that governments don't take on and accrue to themselves responsibilities and authority that they shouldn't have, even in a really, really dangerous situation? I mean, you've just had disaster relief, which was made available to certain states where there were some hurricanes, which were pretty devastating. It's a hard balance to find between how much government you do think you need, and I know in your case, you say the less government we have, the better.
Well, listen, now that I can get the secret classified briefings, I'm more of a conspiracy theorist as a congressman than I ever was as a private citizen. And we have a saying in the United States these days after COVID, the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth is about 6 months. That's about the delay between the theory. And we're running out of conspiracy theories because they've all turned out to be true for the most part in the United States. But the reality is conspiracy theories aren't necessary to explain what's happening when uninformed self-interests are at work. And that's what we have in our government. We have uninformed, ignorant self-interests, and you can pretty much explain all of what happened during COVID with that model. I mean, yes, our institutions in the United States are captive to, the big companies. We have cronyism. Some people call it crony capitalism, but there's nothing capitalistic about it when these people are buying seats at the table and using the government to punish their enemies. I'm the chairman of the antitrust subcommittee in the United States Congress. And so some people want me to go in and advocate for breaking up these big companies that have taken over so many of our institutions. But I would say, instead of trying to put the toothpaste these corporations to accumulate so much power, and the reality is we do bailouts for them. We give them special immunities, and growing the monopolies before we say we need to go in and bust them up using government.
One last thing, because I know you've got limited time, and I've got to ask you about why you're in South Africa in a minute. But there's been a very interesting kind of move, and I think the media has facilitated a lot of this in America. You yourself have come under fire from a media that is so biased that they may as well be working for the Democratic National Convention some of the time. I'm curious about how you feel when you see how Americans responded to that in this election, and how the ratings on some of these channels have just fallen through the floor, and credibility is now in tatters for so many people in the conventional legacy media.
Yeah, well, I think it's time to bring into the discussion one of my favorite South Africans, Elon Musk. I think he was instrumental in changing the course of history by allowing us to go around these institutions of the media, the mainstream media, as we call it in the United States. They basically lost all trust, and people want to go directly to the source. I don't even have a TV anymore in my house. I go straight to X, and yeah, you'll get some bad information, but it quickly gets remedied because there's a crowd that's evaluating the veracity of the statements that you see on X. So it's the quickest way to the truth is to have free speech. And that's what Elon Musk has done for us in the United States. Although X is kind of a nonprofit, he's probably lost more money there in that endeavor than any other endeavor, but he's changed the course of history. And Elon was probably going to go to prison with Trump if this election weren't won. We've got 6 different regulatory agencies in the United States going after Elon Musk. I'm on a committee, a special committee called the Weaponization of Government, and he's been one of the biggest targets. So, God bless Elon Musk for allowing us to have conversations outside of people to get their information directly from the source, uncurated by the people who are basically just mouthpieces for our government in the United States.
So finally, and this goes with what we've just been talking about, free speech and the idea of liberty. And I've got to I got a portrait of George Washington up here on my wall. I've got a framed Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson would have penned back in 1790, 92, somewhere around there. And I'm not an American, but I believe very much in free speech and in the articles of the Constitution, which allow people to live in the freest possible way. And I know as a libertarian, this is probably something that means a huge amount to you, which is why you're in South Africa at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We're here to spread liberty. The concept of having an immutable set of laws that govern how we make our laws is very important. Our Constitution is very important. It's a shining light. In a lot of countries, you don't have things like the First Amendment. And there was a lot of debate when the framers came up with the Constitution, whether there should even be a Bill of Rights, whether they should enumerate some of the rights, because they thought that the people had all of the rights. But, you know, thank God they did enumerate some of them. And we have people in my own government who ignore the Constitution or rewrite the Constitution. But they're finding it very hard to do because the Constitution is what sets up our framework of government. Thank goodness. And so if we just stick to that, we'll be okay.
Well, I wish you a very happy stay here in South Africa. I hope you'll get a little bit of time to also just see some of our country and to meet some of our people. And I wish you and your movement, your ideology, I'm not going to call you an ideologue, but I wish you well. And I think that this is going to be an incredible...
Please do. Please do.
Congress. Very good. Thank you, Congressman.
Hey, thank you. And I look forward to finding some new ideas here to take back home as well.
Thank you so much.